Is that on now?
Yeah. Start again.
Welcome to day 2, session 4, Bootstrap seminar. That's okay. It's been a very, very busy last 6.5 weeks. I can tell. What I want to do is just a little bit of wrap up. There's some of the things we talk about the Kodiak system, about collecting intelligence and tying it together and keeping records, and we sort of bogged down in trying to make a clear demo of how you do that. But there's some of it I would like to sort of show you. And one of the things is a sort of technique that I adopted a long time ago, that if I can have the overhead video camera pointing down to this piece of paper here, that in collecting kinds of intelligence, there are all sorts of things you'd like to get. Sometimes you ingest it. Sometimes people will send you stuff through email channels on the internet, and there's quite a handy process for ingesting those into the augment system. And here's one that came from a fellow that works at Hewlett-Packard, and he had built essentially a community of purpose in pursuing bootstrapping, etc., improvement inside at Hewlett-Packard. And he heard this kind of story we had, and he went and wrote this really, really nice article that told about the problems and the needs, etc., and in the end concluded that if they'd sort of had this bootstrapping approach and an organized C, it really all would have worked much more beautifully. So we said, is it okay if we put this in the journal and have it part of our intelligence collection? Sure, sure. So here it is, the printout. And so we can jump to it and look at it. But first I want to show you a little bit of something that you can read that tab. And so that's the journal number, 13207. And you can tell it up here at the outset and augment it. So why do I use a tab like that? Well, you can zoom back out now, thanks, that we've got a set of tabs that are positional, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so I write this number on the 7 tab and staple it on the back of the thing, and when it sits up like this in a file folder, I say, oh, the number I'm looking for is 7. I can just look right down the 7 row and very quickly grab it. So if I have this around as a paper copy that I like to work with, it just makes a very nice way to sort of keep track of my journalized items. So that's just a funny, semi-dumb little way of adding a methodology that works. And so here are a bunch of them that we put on there. And I just grabbed this bundle, some of them out of date. And I thought I'd just show you a couple because that's particularly interesting. And this one in particular, it's a McDonnell Douglas Open Hybrid Document System Functional Specifications, written 23 April 90 by our good friend Dwayne Stone. So the group there that was doing the CAD-CAM-CAL's integrated architecture project inside of McDonnell Douglas was going to start having an open hybrid document system as one of the elements that they would try to set up as requirements for their integrated architecture. So Dwayne went home and put together, from all the things in the past experiences we've had with the system, the kind of requirements, and very appropriate. He's done a lot of work in the Defense Department stuff of actually writing requirements that have to go out on bid. So there's a lot of stuff there. So it's in the journal. So we can just jump to that and say, how would you approach looking at this if it were a document in your file system? How would you find it if somebody told you about it? So let's do that sort of thing. And if we get the can you give us the so here's Terrell Hurst's item, sort of defined like that. So I can say jump the link any place in here, and go look at it in another window. So looking at top view. And there are a lot of really interested things in there, and his conclusion is what sort of touched me. And so right, so it'd be sort of an interesting thing that said, suppose I were going to write some message to somebody, and I would like to say, hey, so suppose I were going to include that in a kind of, you know, I told you before the operating system in there does masks out the backspace key, so I have to hit a control character to do that, so I forget about that. So I could just add that link into this statement, and any time I want to, add that to a mail item and send off and say, hey, go look at that. So it's a very flexible way in which you start putting to work a collection of things that are in there, because the dialogue about it starts to point to it, and you run across other people's dialogue with the pointers to it, and it's a very, very handy way to do it. And there's this other one of Dwayne Stone's article here. So this you'd find in section, is it O or P? I've got so many binders here now. It's in K. So Dwayne put together a summary piece about the history through the years of the augmented NLS system and where it was used. And it's a very nice one. So if we jump off and look at that, we see kind of how it's organized with background and through the different time zones. So so one of the things to notice if you go in there is by the time it got into the 70s and got started using some of the organizations, that there were a couple of military organizations in the late 70s, ALMSA, and in the mid-80s, this Air Force Communications Command, that actually did some extensive development of applications. And so in the ALMA picture, for instance, they built a subsystem to work with budget, calendar, message, milestones, regulations, suspense. These were all things that they built on top of Augment without having deep programmer involvement, but pretty much like that. And they were using them for project work. And they were all integrated. And in any of those systems they built, you could go look at the file by standard ways and make links into it. But when you invoke the application packages that they're talking about here that wrote on top of it, you had something with a specific kind of user interface system that was modeled for the particular class of users that were going to be using it, and very effective and working. And then the FCC in next years, they developed a more powerful sort of thing on top of that, and added signatures. And for instance, if you've got administrative processes operative, that certain people can sign off on a certain kind of document that's coming around, that if that person isn't there, they need a role. So that says whoever is acting chief of this branch or something, so that there's a process inside for people to sign on that I'm a designee of acting in a role, so I can actually sign on as that role and sign it, and the password process will let me sign it with the encrypted authentication signature I can make, but acting in role for which I'm authorized to act on. So that is very carefully monitored, and it's online being known, and the documents can be handled like that. In the disposition codes we told about before, when a document's to be thrown away. And the suspense thing was a very exotic thing that I never even got to learn much about. But they did a lot of businesses where an important query would come in, and that'd have to get assigned to somebody to say this needs a response by 2 days from now. And that person may have to turn to subordinates or other people, so they make a list of people that would have to pass and sign it off and launch this thing. And the guy could any time find out where that was. They're being passed electronically between people, and their electronic signatures were added, so has he signed off for it? Or no, he hasn't signed off for it. He's launched it on another path to get approval down below him before he's going to sign it off. So it wasn't what you'd call a really exotic system, but you built it on top of this that had all the basic infrastructure that you need to do it, and a special subsystem, and it was extremely powerful. People would have to build, typically there'd be something built in a very special way to do something like that out there, but it used the same mechanisms underneath this. And any given time you wanted, that somebody could give you a citation link that would go bomb right to the middle of this, what status is it is now? Well, when it got signed off by him, this is what it looked like, and you have a link pointing right to it. So the sort of shift in timing and control that made in the process of an organization that's got to respond. So it used to be that it's like a dinosaur. It got hit with a stimulus and it's going to respond, and you couldn't find out for 3 days what was happening to it. See? So the analogy of a better nervous system was right in there, that they really knew where that signal was and when it was coming back, and it would be back a lot sooner than before, and it'd be coordinated with the other things going on.
Was that system using email, or was it stored in a database somewhere?
Yeah, that email passed around a lot of it, and when it stopped being email and journaled, it gets stored in the journal database. So it's a mix. In fact, that these things can be moved that way. And so it was being synchronized. They had something like 5 of these mainframe hosts sitting on there, and those were all coordinated. And somebody asked me earlier about what happens if you really have distributed things like that. How do you keep this journal system working? So that this got worked out as follows, that any given journal would have a major host that was responsible for the archiving, but you'd have any number of hosts that would be sort of signed up to be sort of members of that journal's environment. So any host, anybody working on that host could jump on a link pointing to a journal, an item that was in that particular journal. And if it weren't there, it would be extracted and brought across the network to that one, and it would stay there in the same kind of condition that after a while, when the allotted space would get too full, they'd throw away those that hadn't been looked at for a long time, but it was always gotten back here. So the set of hosts that any given journal went on was purely an administrative choice and things like that. Yeah?
As you're talking here, is this going?
Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, okay. You're talking in the past tense. This was something that was in place and running and is not running now. It's been replaced. What happened to it? What was the life of it? What was the cause of it, the shift to some other system, and what was it shifted to?
Well, it's one of those bloody stories. That was implemented as a specified pilot operation. That they'd had it thought through a lot of what they wanted to do. They looked around for a prototype base. They found Augment. They said it's great, and it turned out to be a lot more than they had thought they could get. So they implemented quite a bit as this pilot, things like that. Then that all got cheered out, and they said, well, look, it's time. We've got to do some replenishment. This was Air Force Center, the Communications Command that's responsible for communications and computers within and among all of the Air Force air bases all over the world. So he says, all right, we're going in and renovating anyway a lot of our administrative stuff, and let's build this into the RFP to go with it, and they want all to be integrated. So they were writing an RFP that would have this, the requirements for having journals and all this stuff, not specified as that sense, but something that said this is what we want, and we know we can get it someplace. So the ownership within McDonnell Douglas was undergoing a lot of turmoil, of course. The executives responsible for this Augment system, which the people were housed in San Jose, this guy was down in Los Angeles area. He'd been within a small outfit that was acquired also that was the nearest thing anybody could find up there to assign this augment system to. They had developed and marketed a bunch of mini computers using a now obsolete database operating system to support small business databases. And he didn't have any idea about all this about. So they went back to talk to the Air Force about this big RFP, and the general was saying, well, I can't go ahead and stick my neck out putting an RFP out on the street in which you guys, somebody hasn't committed. If we're going to put these specs in and you're the only one that has it, and you're not going to commit by now to port this over to modern hardware, I couldn't do this. And the guy gulped, and he said, the vice president said, I don't know the words, I better be careful, because what I heard was from people that were so upset about it that they probably did the whole story. But the guy essentially stuttered around and as though I can't commit. Why, that's $3 or $4 million or something to do a good job of that porting. So the general just, there's no way he could go ahead with that, and he got very upset. So he said, we're calling this RFP off, and we're going to rewrite it, water it down so that it's not wired, essentially committed for this augment system, and get it out of here. I can't do this. He was very angry. So we tried to get DEC to go along with us like that, but we couldn't get them to either. And so anyway, it went for $940 million as a worldwide buy for the hardware and software for all of that. And the whole system would have been a shoo-in because we're the only ones that could do that. And the company that bought it turned out they couldn't meet the watered-down requirements even. So this was, there have been things like that all the way along, and it really dents something about your to run across that. But
just to follow up on that, what was the reaction of the people who had been using it then?
Very enthusiastic and very disappointed. But in the procurement systems that they have out there, to keep the government honest, there are these processes where one group of guys writes the specifications of what they want, and somebody, procurement officer, goes out on bid. And to be fair about it, he can't play favorites. It's got to be sold on what those requirements say and what you judge the other people say they can do about it for a given price. And there's a lot of room when it's a complex thing. There's a lot of space for really mess-ups there where the procurement guy really doesn't get it, and he'll buy it from somebody that no way can do it. And there are a lot of people out there make a profession of going after those RFPs and making all kinds of claims of what they can do, and then when they get the project, hire the people and try to figure out what to do. It's just, there are a lot of cases of that. So we lost a number of things, and that's it. But anyway, that was the demise. That killed it. That within a couple of years, our line of business was dead. So we couldn't keep it under. But anyway, but the lessons learned were extremely valuable, and there's still this. I doubt very much if there's still a system out there that can do that. So sorry to go out. Let's go back. It really isn't healthy to groan too much. But anyway, these are the systems that the FCC built, and it was a very important thing. So if you want to read what Dwayne wrote there about about that, I think it would give you some insight. And here are the many organizations that used Augment through the years. See a bunch of Air Force centers, Army centers, Navy centers, others like that, and even commercial outfits that were doing it. So there were a lot of organizations in which we actually got services in there and built up quite a community of very much enthusiastic people. I still run across them, and they say, do you know what? I was an LS or Augment user back there. And it's kind of fun, but sad. Okay, that's sort of for application history, that just a little little example. And here's some of the ways to say if you've got typical like a handbook. Well, there's a CSCW paper in the back of your thing that's called the says knowledge domains and interoperability and an open hyperdocument system. It's something published a year and a half ago. So there's a branch in there that talks about the basic elements, essential elements of OHS. So, boom, you can just point to it like that with a view that shows you that, and that's the kind of a link. You can just hand this link off to anybody you want and says, oh, this is the current list of essential elements, and boom, they can go right to it. So it sort of forms, as it is there, a basic sort of handbook kind of thing. So there's another one about this functional specs that Dwayne Stone wrote. So what do you do? Tell somebody to go in this and start scrolling through? He says, well, no, this very interesting things you'd find are sort of what are the essential tools that he talks about, and here's a view that just shows the list of those essential tools. Oh, that gives you a very good idea at the outset. Desirable tools, well, that also. Well, how long would it take you for somebody to go thumbing through that to find that out? It's just a very interesting thing. Reminders is something that he would talk about as one of the basic sort of implementations that was built in there. Reminder system. Well, there are the capabilities. So having this kind of viewing and the linking and stuff just makes the use of a heavy documentation base just very much different from the way you'd says, oh, we have a big document base. We can get at it. It's all there. So it's really a very different qualitative thing when the there-ness is like this. See? And there's another big thing that's a program state handbook in that one. And this is the way you'd often see the journal item coming. So it's in the CCC journal. That's CAD Chem Cowell's journal, published 2 years ago. Supersedes this one, references to these, etc. That's kind of a way you get the information. Handbook preparation. All right, here's a whole guide to how you develop online handbooks, etc. In itself is a sort of a handbook. But you just think about if you design a C community, that one of the things it's supposed to do is gather these things and be good at delivering handbooks, but that's one of the things you want everybody to do. So one of your handbooks is how to develop handbooks, right? So here's the sort of kickoff on that we could go look at. Reference handbooks, command sequence to search it, processes for helping make it, programming. So there's a lot of important stuff out there, and I think that's sort of enough just to show. God. Here's a set of things that for a while we were handing around between ourselves, having a lot to do with concurrent engineering at a time when we first learned about this Concurrent Engineering Research Center in Virginia. And a lot of things came through the network about it, et cetera, that we picked up and included. So one of the things that's easy to do is reach out on the internet to a lot of the databases that have been collected there. And they're very, very interesting, but you can selectively stuck stuff in, format it for here and put it in a journal, and then you've really got something in the dialogue. So it's really a very different world when somebody says, oh, we have all those documents. You can do an anonymous FTP and get it, any one of them you want. See? And you say, God, that's a different world from being given a list like this, and you can jump on and sample them and pull the different parts apart. It's just very, very different. And
Doug, there's a point that I'm not sure if I missed when you were going through the description. When you go out like that, or you were able to go out and pull in a document, now it has not been coded, then you process that in some way?
yeah, that
From
that we made it a processes that ingest things, and it'll observe certain conventions, and you can even tell which kind of parameters you want those conventions, but you sort of, in a sense, are telling it how to make a stab at recognizing paragraph breaks, and if there's indentation, how to do it, move it into here. So many documents just come right in nicely structured, and sometimes you have to deal with it by hand to get it structured if you wanted to. Then if you want to, you can declare naming delimiters, etc. like that to put some of them. But a lot of them, if you get used to that particular class of documents, you can bring in and not deal with. There's a whole set of them that come in every month. That there's a committee that works in the internet that was formed 1.5 years ago that puts out monthly reports of all of the different projects that are working in concert, sort of, on issues and different network domains that are part of the whole internet. And so those are in there too. And ways to go hunt for those. And I think that's the way. Right? No. God, you know, I just collected. How could that be? This is really interesting. You know, I have to share with you something that that one of the advantages of growing old is you have an excuse for being forgetful. And so I use that once too often at my house. I thought to my wife, God, I forgot it, and it's really bothering me. I can't seem to remember. And she'd had enough. She says, the trouble with you, Doug, is you can't remember how bad your memory used to be. See? so every time I try to kind of like a goof like this, we'll say, well, I don't know what it is, but it's been a hard kind of last month. So there are yeah, how can it be? A whole set of those things are all listed in there. That's a very good lesson, object lesson. So we'll forget that. Okay. Wanted to show you one other thing. Is okay, I want to show you how you can use a reference list. If you look at branch 13 on this OAD 2250 that we've been looking at, what number is that? It's the one that calls the authorship provisions and augment.
Which section?
R. So you look at branch 13 back there, and you says, those are references. And it's the kind of thing that Ted Kahn sort of asked me about earlier. He says, all right, here's the kind of thing that if you were wanting to cite some of those references in your text, there are provisions you could make. So why don't I reach across and copy that whole branch into this place in this file, pretending that it's part of a document I'm writing and that reference base is there. So what do I have to do to copy that whole branch of those things? Well, it's not very complicated. I just say copy using that link that's sitting there. So there are all those references, see? So let's just try and say, if I jump to ref 1, does that act as a name? Sure enough, that acts as a name. See? It did over there, and it will here. So what if I'm writing something before that? And if I actually write something that says, you know, ... and C, and I make a link. And I say, at what? Let's say 4B. You know what I ought to do is, I really should do this, be sure I know what I cite something that's there. Here's collaboration support, right? So let me say I want to copy that link. Where do I want to copy it? Well, copy it at the statement that's up and at the end of it. So supposedly that got copied there. Let's go up there and look. Yep, see, it got copied there. So we say, all right, I want to move that link, or I'm going to say, here. So there's some place in the text before that reference section where I see this, and I move this link up to here. And let's pick a thing to say 4. Oh, blast. Does somebody want to look in this printed list? And this is what I should have done, is come in here and look. It's ref 8, right? What was I doing? And statement 4. So that says, hey, what I'm talking about is the information you'd find in item number 4 in ref 8. So this gives you a little orientation about what the guy's talking about. If I want to, I can say, oh, jump name next, and boom, I can go see what reference 8 is. Oh, I see, all right. Well, okay, next time I'm reading, I say, oh, well, let me go there and see. So I say, jump to link on that. And boom, there I am, looking off at ref 8 and branch 4 on the view spec I wanted to see. So this kind of little convention in there is just something you built in and used because of all that flexibility, and you made the interpretation be like that, and you look at it, and it's very meaningful as text and explicit in what you're talking about, and takes you right there. So now I'll quit. I will. Let's have the video turn to something more pleasing, like me. Okay, thank you. There's always this one more thing to show you, and I really missed out on some of it, but the thing we need to do is round it out and shift to, there's a section called Human Systems. And as I make the specification that when you finally end up moving your organization to some really significant place in that new frontier, that the cost of moving your human system at that point will be 4 or 5 times or more the cost of the technology, whatever it's going to cost. So my saying, why do I spend so much time on the technology of it? It's sort of like saying, we made a real point that the augmentation system is really important, and it's a coevolution of human and tool system. And we're trying to talk about the Kodiak process. That's a very key one to do. And in order to elevate that very much at the outset, it seems very important you're going to have to bring in a whole new class of tool systems to get you elevated to a place where the evolution you do is going to be meaningful. And so it's to support that, and we say, look, there really is a system that we've banged out and done a lot that really gets you out in that frontier to real gain, and it's a good base to start from. We turn back to human system, we say, once you get that kind of tool system in place, there's going to be a great deal of learning to do and pilot exploration in the human system area. And there's a lot of that which I'm not ready to specify about saying, hey, what's the end standard human system you're going to adopt at all? And we didn't get to do much exploration on that side of it and the constraints we had going out in the commercial world. But it opened up the frontier enough for us just to know there are many, many paths that really want to be explored, how to do it, where you can go. So we have to take groups of pilot people and move them out to the point where you begin to say, there isn't any way I can move the whole organization to here. And maybe that doesn't stop you, because you'd say, well, I could move special operational units out this far, and that would be very valuable. Okay. But there'll become a point where you probably say you can't even do that. So that's That's a sort of a frontier on our frontier out there. We have no idea where that is right now. So it'd be extremely important to know that, because it's like saying, hey, don't stop in Kentucky. There's Kansas. Well, don't stop in Kansas. There's Oregon. See? Like that. There's something about finding out where that is, boundary. So it is never going to happen to find that boundary if we wait for products that will let us reach it. See, the product, because there isn't any sane guy putting out products that will put one out that's that far out, because there isn't a big enough market. So how is that going to be explored in some sense? So these are very important questions that come on. I keep coming back to that sort of issue. So if we want to talk about the human system side of it, the best thing I could do is I relate some examples which I have of our own experience, maybe some more tomorrow, but right now it's like saying, let's get a little orientation about how much really is in human systems. And so if we go to section H, and there's some sort of exercises there in extrapolative thinking that are designed to help us kind of work in that area. So before we do it, what I'd like is, Margaret suggested a short exercise to prepare you for that. So Margaret, prepare them.
What I was going to suggest is that we, I think, probably pair up again so that we don't have a lot of movement around. And just take a few minutes, however, to talk about some of the human systems you think you're going to have to address or begin to be concerned about if you were to introduce the kind of a system that we've been seeing this past couple of hours this afternoon into into one of your sections of the organization. And really what we kind of do is move into brainstorm mode, just kind of range over the areas that you think are going to be affected and that you're going to have to consider managing, changing, wrestling with in many different ways if you were to try to introduce something like that. So if you want to group yourselves either in twos or threes if it's convenient, because I think there's a little bit more interaction, and just brainstorm a little. When we finish that, we will take only 10 minutes to do that, so it won't be very long, because we want to get on into the presentation. But we want to have you shift your mind now from the technology to what impact that would have on the rest of the system. So we're going to let you do that initial step in turning your mind around.
What's the instruction?
The instruction is just to brainstorm and try to list or describe the human and organizational systems that are going to have to be addressed if you introduce a system like Augment into an organization.
practically, you can feel that they're practically going to sleep. I talk because it goes on and on and on, and then they all wake up.
I know your thoughts could go on for some time. But if you're ready to postpone the continuation of these discussions until after 5 o'clock or so. Quickly, I would just like to have a few of your groups comment on maybe one or two of the salient points that came up in your discussions. What about the group back here? Do you have one or two things that... Oh, okay.
I think we went about it a little bit from the other end. Rather than saying we're going to implement Augment, we just started talking about what it would take to do collaborative work, period, inside of the organization in terms of the impact on... Is that better? All right. Okay. So there were a whole series of questions that would need to be asked generally about the organization, namely, could people work in teams? Are they willing to work cross-organizationally? Are they willing to work cross-disciplinarily? Are they willing to accept information from other people? Are they willing to give up ownership of information? How does that impact the reward system, the evaluation system? And it basically came down to the value system of the whole organization in terms of looking at things this way. We didn't even get into the specific roles of, you know, MIS and whoever gets to that.
Could you share what your group did, Ezra?
Is this working? Yeah. Well, I think that we didn't find any significant kind of human organizational impediments to using such a system, and on the contrary, that it was seen as a very useful and powerful tool to facilitate collaboration. And in the case of my organization, I mean, we already do on using paper a lot of the things that Doug was illustrating on the system. And I think as long as the various technical aspects of implementing that could be dealt with, I think the human organizational aspects would work themselves out very easily. And in fact, it would be interesting because, for instance, when we're writing up a discussion paper and then we have to get a number of other groups online and get their comments and go through various iterations, well, sometimes one group may kind of try to leave another group out, you know, and this kind of thing. And it would, because it would be so transparent, I think it would also increase the confidence in the process. So.
Thank you. Another group, are you ready to share that? Had 6 minds back there in the back row.
One of the implementation things we agreed upon, Sasan, I assume so, was setting in place a series of criteria, success criteria, and putting in place measurements. Measurement could be quantitative, as in numbers, or it could be qualitative, as in a quote electronic suggestion box, feedback from people. Felt that was important. And the other area, maybe this is my personal opinion, is that it's got to come from the top or accepted from the top. Most organizations are measured by objectives, and people have things to do to get things done. Unless the top has their objectives altered, it's going to be real difficult to implement. They've got to have buy-in for that area.
How about one of the groups down here in front? Mark, John, you want to share?
Okay, we did not make an assumption that people would buy into this automatically because we felt that there was a lot of conflict with some of the values that people have in our organizational cultures. We listed some things like that as we went through here, not only would we have to deal with the user reluctance for new tools, but MIS or whatever their equivalent is. It doesn't have to be MIS. That controls and sponsors the sort of fundamental platforms and software that competes with and complements this. Some other ones that we talked about, their systems around how people work together and think about themselves as work groups right now, and the membership that they identify with, and how that would change, and how we'd have to deal with that. The training, not only training to deal with using the system, but to show and open up possibilities for people, so that they get trained into seeing things that are possible now that they hadn't made or wasn't possible before. New orientation for new members is sort of one of the things that we'd have to deal with in the human system as this thing gets implemented.
Thank you. You want to share an idea or two back there on mental models or what?
Well, the one thing that we discussed, or in part, was that the rigor that's involved in using a hyper-document type of world tools is, I think, a significant impact to the way a person does their work and so forth, and that it's probably so significant that in order for it to be widely accepted, it needs to be a part of a person's education, and that probably has some impact for Ted, but that was the one thing that we thought was important and somewhat of a stumbling block for implementing it in the professional world.
Thank you. Sam, George, you want to share something from?
See, what we came up with was that we wanted to discuss how managers potentially could feel uncomfortable with an idea of an organization that's really opened up, and how communications can really cross organizational boundaries at that point. And let's see, we also found it very interesting, as one of the other teams did, about how you could deal with potentially unsuccessful training instances. You know, people that, I think as George put, didn't quite get it. You know, and then to also then have a new organizational concept of what documents are and what document ownership means in an organization. And then lastly, you know, if this was to become really pervasive throughout an organization, one of the wild thoughts that was thrown out was that we'd have a real interest in new technologies like Iridium and really mobile computers, so that you could actually have this everywhere.
Well, as you can see, there were a tremendous range of issues that come out of the human and organizational side, many of them which are very deep and complex. But at least we warmed up our minds, and we are ready for you, Doug.
I enjoyed listening, so keep it up. Well, it's just a very good idea to you guys to give input like that. So what we're really going to try to organize for tomorrow afternoon is really tie into it and see if we can set it up as though, okay, you guys in a couple hours of whatever you're going to be able to set role-playing and stuff up to do are going to try to lay out the sort of nature of the problem of really helping make your bees a lot more effective and how you'd approach the executive responsible in the organization for, you know, wherever, if you can find an executive that's responsible for supporting C and B, how you'd approach that person, and suppose you be the nucleus of a C community that you're going to pull together, what would you do? And how would you sell it to that executive? And how would you make those B people really happy and willing to live in it? So maybe we should make some of you guys put on B hats as though you're customer B hats. So we'll probably do that. But I think it'd just be very, very interesting because we had a committee, several committees over a year that got together and met and designed such a thing. And if you want some input, where is it? Well, I got the one for presentations. Anyway, there's a sort of a draft proposal in the back in section L. So that was a lot of committee work and banging around a lot by going through questions like that and saying, well, if you really wanted to really explicitly launch a C community that could really take off, what would you do? So this was the model we built, and we're actually trying to sell it. But we put it in here because it's got a lot of thinking embedded into it along this vector. A lot of issues and questions that we can talk about in the morning some. And so anyway, what I'd like to do now about human systems is try to give you a few little exercises that you can think about that I felt when I thought them up and tried to put my head around them, gave me more insight. So here's the thing. It's like pretending that I was going to put you in charge of a project. And here's the general nature. You'd be given enough people possessing among them all of the necessary basic human capabilities to take over an existing activity that will be assigned to you from a candidate list of activities. Your people will have intelligence, strength, health, size, and so forth necessary for their jobs. All will speak the same language with a spectrum of general education. But none will have the special knowledge, physical skills and conditioning, social skills and conditioning, and so forth, possessed by the just departed staff of the activity you're going to take over. So next Monday morning you take this new collection of raw people and you move into this specified activity and all the other people left on Friday, and you're sort of suddenly going to be faced with understanding a lot about what the human system is involved. So let's just look. Here's a few lists of things that we might assign you from, so be prepared for them, see? So you'll take over all the facilities, equipment, tools, records, etc. left behind yesterday by the successful coping previous staff. You can spend up to 5% of the previous operating budget on consultants and educational courses, but you can't hire any previously experienced people to do any of the actual work. So this is to get you to think about it. So let's just look at some of these assignments we might give you. One of you is going to report to take over an NFL football team.
Is this where the team players have left or just the administration?
Everybody.
Everybody.
The VC's brought in a new staff and fired the entire organization.
All right, so you just say, well, you know, what is there to learn? So what is it? You realize what the players have is years and years and years of conditioning up to high school and college, etc. The language that they have about all of this thing, the physical conditioning, the skills that are honed up very much, their relationships with the coaches, and the coaches' skills and knowledge, etc. And that's a lot to fill. So you say, oh, well, we got the equipment and the facilities, that's the important part. And you realize, no, that's a small part of it. So that's way for you to think about the depth and key criticalness of a human system. What about the next one? Oh, one of you lucky guys, I'm going to pick a man for this, is going to take over a high fashion garment design and manufacturing company. Everybody's left. You got all the records. So he says, what do you have to know about that world out there? How you promote it, how you do, what marketing is like, you know, what the fashions are, etc., like that. There's a hell of a lot that you have to know. Well, all right, so one of you lucky persons are going to get that one. Somebody else is going to take over a big orchard in Florida. Equipment and everything's there. All the chemicals you need to spray. Anything else like that. So what do you need to know? Somebody else is going to take over a semiconductor factory. See? Somebody else is going to take over the city administration in New York.
Can't do much worse.
Improve it. Somebody's going to take over a 4-star restaurant. Okay. So you just look at all that. Well, look, I'll tell you about one thing that I learned about. I read. I just love to read anthropological studies, etc., that sort of really reveal this thing. And the one I read that just sticks with me for over a decade or something now, it was just thrilling. Some anthropologists went out in the Kalahari Desert and found a small group, this extended family of Bushmen that lived out there, and camped with them long enough to learn the language, follow them around, understand the social relationships that exist, all their habits and customs, and even tried out some of the things that they can do. It was really interesting about the most primitive set of facilities you can imagine. Just they could pack up in a moment's notice and walk off. That's their stuff. You know, they could carry what they're going to live. Camp under a tree, live. Survive out there where any ordinary people we know has to have a Land Rover full of equipment in order to survive. So they follow around, how do you survive? So one of the really interesting things I read was when they find water. So they got an ostrich shell that they can seal off and carry water in. How do you get the water? They find this dry water bed. Well, I think I could find that dry water bed too. So they walk along it like that. Right here. What distinguishes this spot from any others? Well, can't you tell? No. Well, all right, how are you going to get the water? Well, we take this long reed and shove it way down in there like that and then suck up the water. So by God, they'd suck up water. How'd you find it? Well, okay, so we'll pretend we found it and we'll try to suck up the water too. And these anthropologists didn't have the suction power to do it. First place, they couldn't have found it. In the second place, they couldn't have gotten it out if they did. So how did those people evolve that kind of A, sense to find it, and B, the sort of capability to extract the water? See, they found that the poison that they used was a nervous system poison that would disable the nervous system, wouldn't kill anything, but it was very powerful. So it wasn't all that bad if they scratched themselves, but it would disable somebody or an animal, then they could go up and do it in. Well, how did they get that? Well, it was the root of a tree. Oh, well, we could do that. No, but it came out of the root of the female version of the tree. Down there like that. How in the world did they do it? And they went simple processes to extract that and develop this kind of poison. So they just had a long list of things like that. Well, that was amazing enough. When it got over to the social relationships and their language, no written language. So they'd been there long enough, they could learn the language well enough, they start hearing and listening to what goes on. And, you know, they heard a case where a big concern of one of the guys was, well, what was it? Well, it's his best friend and the best friend's wife, and the social relationships among them are being strained because of this guy being worried about the other fellow being concerned about relative wealth or something like that in the eyes of his new wife. See, something that would be a very high level and subtle sort of social consciousness in our world, to see somebody that was that sensitive and stuff. Not only were that sensitive, they had an ample vocabulary to discuss all those relationships. See? So you just say, look, they're primitive in one sense like that, but there's a lot going on inside of that thing like that. So it's really brought that home to me, that the fact that they don't have much on the tool system side just doesn't mean that they don't have a very well developed on the other side. So then what are the images in the idea of progress, capital P progress, in different cultures? So we look at some of the cultures that haven't developed with the sort of artifact side of it, technology and we feel quite superior. But then they really find out that there's a lot of sophistication in there and family relationships and ways to work out things that we don't have time to do. A lot of things. So those things are really very revealing and educational to me. So one of the people here, I think I ought to sign saying, you're going to take a bunch of people and take over a Kalahari Bushman camp and survive. So what would you need? What's the human system? The tool system is very simple. So what do you need for the human system? So these are all examples that to me really would bring home. If you really start isolating, it says, okay, even if you knew everything was supposed to be done, how long would it take to infuse the workable knowledge and skills in an individual people with their new roles? So you can have all the knowledge that you can tell them about or something, but it takes a long time to get done to a conditioned applicable knowledge. So you say, well, look, what if the future state of the organization I'm concerned with in 10 years from now, it's as different as if I had to move in to take over the NFL football team or something, and those people like that. There's just there are a lot of details and everything else to find out how to evolve into. So if you think that the organizations aren't going to be that different, at least the surviving ones aren't going to be that different, you say, well, maybe there's not that much to worry about. But the pace at which things are going today, like the Soviet Union collapsing, and suddenly there are all these republics trying each to devise its own kind of government and the relationships between them, and also try to move to a market economy at the same time. They're facing something that I can't imagine how they're going to do it like that. Well, you realize that's happening awfully suddenly, but for many of our organizations, there's going to be transitions of that scale in pervasiveness and sort of nature that somehow in the next decade or two we're going to work our way through. And so it's this orientation about, hey, the finding a strategy for help navigating our way through like that is pretty important. Then it may just be an Engelbart is something like saying, look, I'm not good for much else, and anyway, no matter what I try to explain, people don't understand me very well. So why don't I pick something that's so far off like that no wonder people don't understand me, because, I had a psychologist that was sure that was my problem, and it still might be. So you can say, well, maybe that's his problem. He's got to pick something way out there because of some quirk in his own human nature, and no one, you couldn't understand him, because as soon as you get close to understanding him, subconsciously he's going to have to shift so that it keeps you confused, because if you understand what he says, you'll realize it isn't worth much, or something like that. Do you understand? Well, I missed if you did. So anyway, so really this kind of premise that there is a great deal of change, A, that will be beneficial, we have to pursue, and B, that if we don't do a good bit of that change, it's going to be hard for organizations to survive. So anyway, that's the premise, and if that doesn't hold enough water, then don't worry that much about how we're going to change. But if you start to believe that, A, there's a great deal of value in organizations to make some of the changes that are out there, and B, if we don't, we're in real trouble, then you say, okay, it's really important to get oriented about the change process, and if there's any kind of strategic approach to that is good, let's glom onto it, shake it out, learn about it, evaluate it, and put it to work and get going. So I'm going to go on the premise that at least for these 3 days, you guys will go along with that positive premise, and so we're saying, all right, so what do you do about that? So he's laid out this kind of vague set of things that go into a strategy, and he keeps telling you there's a strategy there. So all right, so I've done all the hard work now. That you guys can now tomorrow afternoon figure out the solution. See? No, it isn't going to be like that. But anyway, so we get back to the human system side. What I heard people talk about in general are significant problems that are out there, and that's really the significant problems of even getting a strategy started, of even getting people to perceive enough about the value or the burning need for making the change that they'd go along with the strategy. Well, maybe they see a perceiving enough one. How do you convince them there's a strategy that's worth taking seriously? Well, taking it seriously will mean changing things. Well, how do you get them over that threshold? So all of those are human system transitional issues. And if that discourages you, you say, well, you better quit, because that's what's going to be on the path all the way along to the future state. Big, big shifty problems like that. And so that's why I say the paradigms, the human system side, are the really core of it. And so since I spent a lot of time with that tool system, and that's what I get notorious for all the time, is the tool system. I try to, some people say, yeah, but it wasn't the tool system that got me expelled from the research world. It was the goddamn human system side, because it made me sound so weird, see, about what I was saying. So anyway, so that's a very important part of it, co-evolving those two systems. So getting a line on the human system is very critical, and there are very important disciplines out there, organizational development, with mixtures of anthropology and sociology and psychology, that are very important. And it's not that if they haven't seen some of this stuff, or operating in a paradigm that doesn't appreciate how much the technology is going to perturb things, that's okay. Bring them in, because we need it all. So the important thing is to find an environment in which we can start integrating these different viewpoints via assessing experiences that people get and trying to make consistent explanations for it. And if people come through with a given hypotheses about pathways that are better, we got to have places to try that and pilots. We got to watch that and integrate the lessons learned from that to that. So that's a process that's pure Kodiak. See? And so to elevate the capability for a community to do that is just very, very important. So you look out at all kinds of communities that are out there, professional societies and everything, and a lot of them are out there that they feel that what they're doing is very, very key to the world. And you say, wonder why they aren't more concerned with the effectiveness that they have for doing their actual community work. So this is, I was giving a talk just a week ago, a short talk. I had this unpremeditated trip to Washington because I got called up and said, you've been given an award at Electronic Freedom, no, Electronic Foundation, Electronic Frontier Foundation. Pioneer Award. So I says, well, I need all the help I can get to get people's attention out there, so I guess I better go and be gracious about it. So it took 3 days out, and those are 3 days I didn't get to get that much ready here for reasons. So look, standing up, and these are people at this conference, all oriented about the network of the future, and they call it their frontier of the future too, coming about like that. And so I pointed out to them that they're going about their business of becoming a sort of a society and doing the work of getting ready for that frontier, and they're using all the old techniques of having meetings and publishing things in paper, etc. And when were the cobblers going to put new shoes on their own family, see? So that's one of the sort of odd things about the people come along to organizations and say, boy, I've got just the scheme for how to improve your organization. Oh, yeah, and here it is. Well, how does it work with you? Oh, I don't use it, I just sell it. And I take real delight in talking to vendors who are going to get in groupware or are out there advertising now. And I say, when I talk to user organizations, I say, here's the way to deal with those vendors. Ask them that question. How do you use it? And I'll bet you 9 to 10, the odds are that they'll say, you can come and we'll demonstrate it. We got a guy in a demo room that really knows how to fly it, and he'll show you how to use it. And you say, sorry, that isn't what I meant. I meant, how do you put it to work in your organization? I want to come and see how your organization hums along with this. What's the radical change? I want to see the new methods of procedures and stuff. Oh no, you got it all wrong. Our product people developed this product, And there was some guy had a lot of good ideas in there, and we're sure. And so we're putting a lot of money into the marketing hype about getting this out. And yes, it really will make a big difference in your organization. Well, yeah, but show me the examples. Who's tested it out? Well, da-da-da-da-da. And see, so it's, what we got to do is make them too embarrassed to do that. Seriously, without having put it to work in pilot operations that really verify that the particular configurations they're putting together and recommending work. And to say, well, probably the cost of getting out new products and competing out there is enough already to make them, so you're not going to find many willing to do that really well. You got to be sure that they don't make a phony kind of pilot of it and doctor the image like that. So really, as far as I can see, that the user organizations have to get proactive enough to set up a way in which they can do the prototyping, etc., and they know what they're talking about. And so if the vendor doesn't have testing like that, they can compare it with what the users can compare it with what they know about the future. So I've gone through all kinds of perceptions, looking at the way the world must change and what's going to happen, etc., like that. And time after time, over the last 30 years since I started thinking bootstrapping, I come out with it that I don't see any other really effective way to sort of face the changes in our organization but something like this bootstrapping. And that the user organizations have to get involved. And the vendors, if they get involved with the user organizations, it would be multiply healthy and a much extra payoff for them, because they not only learn what a big class of customers is going to want, but they also learn how to make their organizations better with their own products. So great motivation for them to start building the products and really boosting their own organization with it, and then also simultaneously sharing that with some users and selling it. So anyway, those are the sort of orientation that I get. And this is, how does that relate to human system? Well, it's just because the human system is going to be such an important part of the change that those vendors aren't positioned right now to bring out the products that they can tell you about. Because they're designing it on a one-sided base. The product people may have a few consultants out there in the business, but boy, the kind of changes in all kinds of ways of doing your work, they're going to be there. So anyway, that's giving you as much sermonizing as I think you could tolerate. And are there any kind of amens or something that you'd like to make in the next few minutes, or or defensive stands or something? And so, from what I understand, Margaret and Ted and Bob Yates are all people with professional backgrounds that are coming from the kind of world of user organization, the user system side more than the others. And I don't know the rest of you well enough to know about that. But so does either of the three of you want to say something on this, to say out of defense or help, or? Ted?
Well, I would, but it'd be embarrassing because my own organization had this, prior to this, had the same exact problems you're describing, which is, I think most of the frustrations. We were trying to actually produce video editing.
Use microphone, please.
Yes.
I won't name the organization. It's still in existence. We were trying to produce video editing systems for people who'd never edited video before, and so a lot of us there felt that our own organization should be the first place to be able to do this if actually we were producing a product like that. And unfortunately, I have to say that by the time it was finished, the number of people who had actually edited a videotape on this, even after 2 years in development, was probably less than 10% of the organization. But the good part was that at least the chairman was one of the only VC chairmen in the entire group who'd ever been able to demonstrate his own product to other people. So we get one score on that. But I think the whole idea of participatory design, which has become a big buzzword in the design community, is really tied to just this issue, and that is that you need people who are going to be the end users of whatever is being done to be a part of this process from the very beginning. And what's ironic to me is that I've always thought that way, but didn't realize just how foreign that really was until I found several organizations where it just didn't operate that way.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think talking about vendors and working with them, it's occurred to me in the last year or so that we really need to get the vendors to redefine what a product is. What they deliver these days is beta stuff, and they call it a product, and you spend a year helping them test it and document it and get it to work. So I think one of the things that the C community could really do together is to educate vendors on what a product is that somebody would pay money for and what they expect for it.
Right. That's a good point. By tomorrow afternoon, we really like to list the kinds of things that are sort of valid sort of services the C community could provide. They'd be unique as a community. Good.
I have to comment on that for a second, being a vendor. Especially from our standpoint, where our corporation is, we value our reliability, availability, all that stuff. And users say, that's okay, we'll take what you got, and we understand it's a beta. But once it gets out there, it's no longer beta in their eyes, it's production. So the users have to play the same game on the other side of the story. There's a tremendous demand for more function, more things, as quick as you can possibly get it to me. And the first thing a user thinks of is function, function, function.
Very good.
Now it works. Oh, you want it to perform too. Oh, you wanted it to stay up. Well, you didn't tell me that. You wanted to function. So it's a double-edged sword.
That's, and just a minute, you sort of take that little bit of dialogue, you amplify it by distance and content, and say, how does that get recorded and integrated into what the whole community kind of builds as a common knowledge base? And that's a Kodiak process, the concurrent integration and development and so on like that. More examples, please?
Well, I was just going to comment. There are a lot of people who have spent a lot of time looking at the issues of organizational change and now organizational transformation, but many of them have not really incorporated the ideas of what technology brings to the corporation. And then many of those who have looked at the two together have looked at it in terms of work groups or something that's not as pervasive, would not affect the overall operation of an organization. So there's still a lot to be learned, and we really need the opportunities to bring the communities of people who have experience in various areas together, the users, the vendors, the people who are designing things, and those who understand some of the dynamics of the organization. And the C communities can help make some of those things happen. Because we need perspectives over time, and too much of the studying and early reported research oftentimes are documentations of first-time implementation, particularly of group kind of products, and that distorts things because we all know that the human system sides take several iterations before you get to the point where you're really looking at maybe what the tool is really doing on behalf of the total system.
Yes. Okay, I start out. You talk.
I think maybe one of the reasons why 20 or 30 years ago this didn't get adopted perhaps as widely as it might have been has a lot to do with the human system, human and organizational systems. And nowadays, given that we are moving to a knowledge-based economy, given that total quality management has become a preoccupation of virtually all industries, and given the associated things like delayering and empowerment and so on, I think the time is really right for something like this. And I think Margaret's comments and some of the comments of others in terms of warning on how to implement the possible pitfalls of implementation is very important, because you look at the promises that were made with artificial intelligence even just 10 years ago, and where's AI today? It's made progress. You look at the way expert systems are being implemented in industry, some of it is fairly impressive. but we don't see robots walking all over the place. In the process, a lot of organizations got burned by systems. Maybe the systems weren't able to do what was promised, or maybe the human system was not such as to be able to use the technology. And I think that's a very important thing to pay attention to.
That's good. So we'd like to integrate a lot of that. So we're now reached the time, and we're going to a different place to dinner tonight. And one thing, can you switch the computer video on, please? And we're also going to have, we think we're going to have these 3 guests that are people that are graduates that are going to come and join us to dinner. So they're all doing things that are very interesting. In a sense, they're all consultants. And Bernie DeKoven has been pioneering. Oh, that. No, no, it isn't what your baby does in the diapers either. No, he coined the term technography, and has been a pioneer for many years in the use of a projected video image from a outline processor and the such to really help conduct a meeting and keeping it in order and getting a good record of it. And he wrote a book about that, and now he's doing other kind of consulting. And Marcella Hoffman works at SRI in the Business Intelligence Unit, and they have a multi-sponsor project going on now in groupware. So he's full of a lot of stuff and really interested in it and got a lot of connections, so he'll want a dialogue. And Prasad Kaipa was very much interested in learning and organizational learning, and has been consulting and working on that for a long time, and we'll get very excited, and you have to watch out because he'll take off. So anyway, so that's something there, and I just want to tell you about tomorrow. So late in the morning, we're going to have a demonstration in the room over here. That's a room just like this, diagonally across it. We set up with a projector thing of both what Dave Gardner is going to do with, it's a system that's called Hyperform, and Alan Baumberger's coming. He has a system that's very augment-like that he's evolved that runs on a Macintosh, and it's got a different interface and can do some graphic stuff. And so he and his colleagues adopted Augment back in the late 70s when they were developing a big system, a big operating system. So they got to using it, and they all went through this thing of rejecting a lot about it, but then they got to love it so much to do their software development. So he started work on his own programming, something like it, it's quite like it. And what Dave has is something that is sort of being put up to be, it's sort of a copying almost everything exactly, to be sort of careful not to do something new that won't fit because of all the shaking down experience you got. It's a good approach to do that, and afterwards you can do your evolving. So it runs in DOS under Windows, and is a really interesting candidate for support out there as it rolls up. So he can demonstrate the state of it now, and we'll do that tomorrow. And then tomorrow afternoon we're going to be, among other things, we've got a bunch of the grads coming. What's the matter here? So Marcelo and Prasad are coming back, and then we, who in a sense have a lot of consulting thing, but I forgot to do Bob here. So Bob Yates would be included in this list. Pardon? Oh, no wonder it wouldn't spell. Oh, good grief! You know, it just doesn't work to be slewed around like this. And that's where you want to learn how to transpose. See, right? So anyway, so they're sort of shaken down. They're consulted out in the world anyway, and these guys have got a lot of resources. So this is adding a lot of good resource to our world. They're coming, and there'll be some other guys coming too that are graduates in different organizations. So they're coming for lunch, and we'll sort of enrich in that process and be kind of interested in evolving and helping participate in the afternoon. So it is an enrichment experience, if you want to say. And then Mary has some maps. We're going to a Chinese restaurant for sort of cocktails and dinner tonight. And you have a map already? So they're expecting us 5:30. So you'll have to find some transportation and share rides if you can. And that's great. So this is a